Welcome back. We're talking about the World Cup competition set for Russia next June. Let's get back to our panel right now. John, let me start with you. As I was saying, that this is a showcase for fans. Looking at ticket sales, most of the tickets for next year's tournament have been bought by Russians. And this one surprised me, that was followed by American fans. And America's not even in the World Cup.
Yeah, it's one of the great tragedies of this World Cup, really, is that America has done so well in recent World Cups. And I, for one, was looking forward to seeing the USA and how they progressed and converting the football fraternity over there to soccer. Right. It is very much a big disappointment, but I'm not surprised because there's a lot of support for football in America. Maybe it's not the mainstream sport and it goes under the radar a little bit, but there is a lot of support, especially for Premier League teams. I mean, we have a lot of support in America, and it doesn't surprise me. I'm not surprised.
Right, and some of the Premier League teams do play here on exhibition matches and things like that. But if we look back to next year in Russia, is everything in place right now? All the infrastructure in place, stadiums, transport, airports, hotels, stuff like that? Is Russia ready, do you think? John?
That's that question for me, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So, with what I hear, I mean, Russia is well prepared. I mean, we've got a mixture of renovated stadiums and new stadiums, and the Luzhniki Stadium has got a great history. It was built in 1956, and it staged major events before. And we had the European Champions League final. Manchester United won the European Champions League in 2008. So a lot of English people are used to, were familiar with Moscow and going over there. So my expectation is that everything's going to be ready. And I think FIFA have kept a close eye on what's going on in Russia. And I think the original plan was to have more stadiums, but it's been filtered down to a more reasonable number of stadiums that are going to be taking part in the tournament. So I think what I hear is everything is going to be well prepared.
Right. Elliot, when we look at a big event like the World Cup, of course it's a massive boost for the host nation, but it's also a very expensive undertaking. Overall, do the benefits outweigh the costs of staging something like this?
No, I don't think they do, to be honest, with the current model. And I think what you're seeing increasingly is a great deal of hesitation around the world in terms of cities and countries wanting to host the Olympics or the World Cup. The current model for hosting such events is simply too expensive and involves a great deal of wastage of public money that could obviously be spent on essential services like schools and hospitals. Personally, having followed the reform of FIFA since the scandals that have dogged it in the last few years, obviously we have a new president now. But what I'd really like to see, I think the fundamental thing for FIFA is to reform the model of the World Cup so that it's cheaper for fans to go to and it's cheaper for the local populations of the places that host them. Most of the time, in fact, almost all of the time, the countries that are hosting the World Cup have perfectly good stadia in place already. They don't need to build fancy new stadiums. They could perhaps build one to recognize the final, for example. But this competition, I think, is now pushing $12 billion, the cost to Russia. And I don't think you can really make a good argument for that in this day and age.
Yeah, and when you say make it more accessible to more people, does that mean bringing perhaps the price of tickets down?
The prices of tickets is extortionate. I mean, I understand they have discounted ticketing for Russian fans, but football should be open to everybody. And if you look at the prices that are being asked of ordinary fans from around the world, it's simply extortionate. Football fans are the people who give the game any value to begin with. If it was up to me, the World Cup tickets would be free.
Right. Artur, one of the sad things about a big event is like this, and when we look at the age that we live in right now and the environment that we live in, there's always the threat of some kind of terrorist attack. Is Russia prepared for this? Russia, in fact, has already suffered some deadly terrorist attacks in recent years. So how big a challenge is it for the country to make sure that this is a safe tournament, not just a terrorist attack? Football over the years has also attracted, a racist element, hooligans. They've now tried to introduce fan ID cards to make sure that the right people get to these tournaments. But how big a challenge is that going to be for Russia?
Well, I don't think we should pay too much attention to the British press. They love Russia. They love writing about all these kind of problems, which don't really exist in that extent. Well, there are, of course, similar problems in many countries around Europe and around the world, but Russia is no different. As for the security measures, well, I've never seen so much police in the city ever, and Russia is taking this tournament obviously really serious, and I'm absolutely positive it's going to be one of the best, if not the best, tournament in the history of World Cups. And yeah, everyone is obviously waiting for it. We've never hosted such a big event, and even though the Russian national team hasn't been at its best, it's actually the lowest FIFA ranked host team in the history of World Cups. Russia is now 65, but still the expectations are high, especially after the today's draw. The Group A was actually called a Group of Life.
Okay. Paul, looking ahead to the tournament, to what FIFA wants to do, FIFA has decided to increase the number of teams in the finals from 32 to 48. That'll happen from 2026. What kind of impact do you think that's going to have on the tournament, and what kind of impact would it have on a country like China?
Some Chinese fans joke that that decision to expand to 48 is like a big gift for China. But if you look at the history of China's failure to qualify from Asia, no matter how many teams are allowed from Asia, China always fell short. So it's a problem with China itself. I think this nation really should develop the real depth of its football talent from the very bottom of grassroots level. And now the country isn't very optimistic. It's quite concerned about the level of those under 20, under 22, those junior level teams, because they are not showing their competitiveness against some of the other relatively strong Asian teams. So yeah, we will wait and see if the 48 would be enough for China to qualify into the World Cup. But I think for the entire world, it would be very intriguing to see how the World Cup will be like when it's become so crowded with 48 teams.
What do you think, John? Does it become overcrowded at that stage when it's 48?
Yeah, I do worry. I think we've got the optimum number at the moment with 32 teams. It does concern me if we go to 48. But the upside of it would be to have teams like China in there, because I think it'd be fantastic to have China in the World Cup. And I think 2026 is probably about the target for China. The next World Cup in 2022 in Qatar is possibly too soon. For me, I'm disappointed the next World Cup is not in China, because I think that would have been a much better host nation than Qatar. And it would be a good way of getting China into a World Cup to have them stage a World Cup. But I remain to be convinced on the merits of having 48 teams in a World Cup, because it's quite a long tournament already. This tournament's going to be a complete month. Starts on the 14th of June, ends on the 15th of July. So it's a very full schedule. I'm not sure how it's going to work with 48 teams.
Elliot, John just mentioned the next World Cup, which will be held in Qatar. The world governing body has come under a lot of criticism, and it's been hit, as you pointed out a moment ago, with corruption allegations of how these hosts are chosen. Do you feel Qatar's a bad choice, or is it a good choice for the next World Cup?
It's a terrible choice. It's a country that has no history or pedigree in footballing terms, and it's extremely small country physically to host that number of people. And of course, as we know, it's very, very hot in June, July, which is when the tournament traditionally has been held. And of course, there's major questions outstanding in terms of how the bidding process went for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups. Of course, That's not to say that the football in Qatar might not be fantastic. Yeah. It may well be.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.